For the politics of the day, let's go to Canberra now. Joining us live is the Shadow Immigration Minister, Tehan. Dan, good to see you. Your opponent missing for key meetings, vague answers on questions about detainees. Is it obfuscation? Is it deception? Or is it incompetence?
Well, Pete, I think it might be all three, sadly. And that's the real worry, because this minister's number one job, and he said it in the parliament this week, is to keep the Australian community safe. And he's failed to do that. And there are huge question marks now hanging over his head. And I think the Prime Minister needs to act. He needs to step in, because the Australian community are worried. We're talking about 7 murderers who were released into the community, 37 sex offenders, including child sex offenders, and a list of others, a list of other hardened criminals. So the Prime Minister really now needs to act, especially when we now know that the Minister didn't even bother to attend 3 key meetings with the Home Affairs Legal Council to discuss the possibility that they might lose the High Court.
Needs to act. How, Dan?
Well, I think the Minister needs to go. I think there's no question now that the Minister needs to go. There's no other alternative. He can't answer basic questions. Yesterday in the Parliament, he had said that these detainees are being continuously monitored. Well, we know that 18 of them have reoffended. So how were they being continuously monitored? We know that he made a decision that 36 of them don't need to wear ankle bracelets. So how are they being continuously monitored? These questions just aren't being answered. And the Australian community is concerned and worried for their safety. And they should be, because it seems that this minister is just not up to the job.
Dan, a couple of other issues this morning. It is a busy morning for us here, but I want to ask you about these stage 3 tax cuts, the changes to them. The government wants to spend $40 million on selling the package out to the public. I mean, the polls show us that it doesn't need to be sold because most people like it. So is the spending package of $40 million really necessary?
But once again, sadly shows that the government's got its priorities wrong. There's a cost of living crisis, and that $40 million should be going back to the taxpayers who paid that money to the government, not to be wasted on an advertising campaign, to help them with the cost of living issues that they're dealing with their electricity bills going up. What's happened to that $275 discount? That has gone nowhere. What's happening when you go to the supermarket? Prices continue to go up and up. That $40 million should be being spent on the Australian people to help them with their cost of living crisis, not on the government spruiking how poor a job they're doing.
And just before we get to the fires in your state of Victoria, Dan, I do want to ask you, I'm not sure if you've been across this news at all, but the AUKUS deal might be caught in the crossfire of the stalled funding package in the US House. At the very least, it's going to delay things while they try and get approval for that in the House. Do you have any concerns about that as someone who was involved in the earlier talks when you were in government over AUKUS?
Well, this is incredibly important to our nation, that we can continue to progress the AUKUS deal. And if it is stalling, then the Prime Minister needs to be acting. Our ambassador in the US needs to be acting. We need to be doing all we can to make sure that momentum continues. Okay. We know the geostrategic climate is deteriorating here in our region. We need that agreement and we need it to be implemented as quickly as possible. So the government really needs to be on the ball when it comes to this.
Dan, just a final one now, the fires, and a worrying report in the Herald Sun this morning that dozens of linesmen who are crucial to fixing infrastructure and helping reconnect electricity have been accused of turning off their phones on Tuesday night because of an industrial dispute. If this report is accurate, how alarmed would you be about that?
Incredibly alarmed and deeply concerned. That is not the Australian way. I've fought fires myself, and when communities are under threat, everyone pitches in. No one turns their phones off. Everyone in the community does what needs to be done, whether it's out there fighting the fires or it's providing support to those who are fighting the fires. Everyone does their bit. That is deeply disturbing if it's true and not the Australian spirit.